Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're venturing deep into the shadowed hills and backwoods of the Appalachian Mountains, where old legends, isolated cabins, and hidden trails hold secrets that shouldn't be found. These are 10 true Appalachian horror stories, each one proving that sometimes the scariest things aren't monsters. They're human. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you? Now, let's step into the darkness together. I used to think the quiet was a kind of mercy, especially after I left him and landed that night shift cashier job at the Go Mart outside Beckley. Most nights felt the same. The hum of the freezer, the stink of burnt coffee, and the endless white silence pressing in from the blizzard outside. I lived in a small trailer up on Piney View Road. Nothing fancy, just a sagging metal roof and thin walls that shuddered when the wind clipped them. I kept myself busy with routine, restocking shelves, counting bills twice, checking locks 3 times, because the empty hours made old memories louder, especially the sound of his boots when he paced the apartment during fights. I guess that's why the stray cat behind the dumpster got to me. That night, just after my shift ended, I found it sitting in the snow, tapping its tail in this weird rhythm. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, like it was waiting for something. The rhythm stuck with me as I trudged home through snow that swallowed my boots, reminding me too much of footsteps I used to brace myself against. By the time I got inside the trailer, the storm was beating down so hard it made the metal roof vibrate like a tuning fork. I tried warming up a can of soup, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. This metallic taste creeping up my throat the way it always did when I was remembering more than I wanted to. I set the spoon on the counter and found it lying on the couch 10 minutes later, though I swore I hadn't moved it. I told myself I was just tired. Night shift does that to you. Trauma does too, but I didn't say that part out loud. I tried to sleep, thinking of my coworker Jess telling me earlier that I needed to relax, that storms made everyone jumpy. She's the only one who ever noticed when I flinched at sudden sounds, but even she brushed it off earlier when I showed her a photo my phone somehow took by itself. A dark blur beside the dumpster, shaped like someone standing too close. It vanished after I closed the camera app, replaced with static, and she laughed, saying my phone was probably freezing its digital ass off. I wanted to believe her, but when I crawled into bed around midnight, the trailer felt off-kilter, like someone had just stepped out of it and forgotten to take their presents with them. The thud hit at 2 a.m. sharp, snapping me awake before I even realized I'd fallen asleep. It wasn't the storm. I know the difference. This was heavy, calculated, right above my bedroom. My breath fogged in the cold air, the metallic taste flooding my mouth again. I lay still, heart doing that panicked stutter, listening as the sound shifted into a slow, deliberate pattern. 3 steps, a long pause, 2 steps, the same rhythm the cat made, the same rhythm I used to hear in the apartment when he got quiet angry, pacing before he'd yell. I whispered to myself it was snowmelt sliding down the roof, ice shifting, anything but what it sounded like. The next morning, the storm pinned me inside. I tried brushing it off, but the footsteps gnawed at me all day. When I stepped outside to get wood for the stove, I found a line of dents on the roof edge. Fresh, deep, like someone had tried climbing up. I took a picture, my hands shaking so hard it blurred. When I sent it to Jess, the image she got showed nothing but smooth snow. She even called me, half laughing, half annoyed, swearing I was messing with her. That made something inside me sink low and heavy. It reminded me of when I'd told my ex I heard someone trying our door one night, and he said I was imagining drama where none existed. That afternoon, the storm thickened, turning the light into gray, bruised air. Inside the trailer, the walls tightened with cold and silence, and every creak felt amplified, like the whole place was breathing shallowly. I walked from window to window, wiping fog away, trying to convince myself no footprints circled the trailer even though I'd swear there were impressions earlier. I turned on the radio for distraction, but the only channel that came in was static with this faint tapping underneath. 3 clicks, pause, 2 clicks. I unplugged it and sat on the floor, pressing my fingers to my ears until the metallic taste returned sharp enough to make me swallow hard. Night came early. I kept the stove burning so the popping wood masked the wind, telling myself nothing would happen again. But sometime after midnight, the radio clicked on by itself, crackling a low hiss across the room. The roof answered it. 3 steps, the long, aching pause, then 2 more. Slower this time, like whatever was up there was leaning in. My breath turned shallow. I grabbed my phone and whispered, "Please stop," though I didn't know who I was talking to. The footsteps stopped, but something dragged across the metal, this long scraping that shook dust from the vents. I curled against the wall and waited for it to end, thinking of the nights I used to hide in the bathroom, counting his footsteps, praying they wouldn't stop outside my door. The last sound was a heavy shift right above me, like a knee or hand bracing down. Then nothing. Just wind, and my pulse drowning out the room. When daylight finally broke, I stepped outside with numb fingers and blinking eyes. The snow on the roof looked untouched, but when I lifted my hand to steady myself on the ladder, a dark bruise stretched across my wrist, shaped like pressure from a thumb. I wore that mark for weeks, still have a faint shadow of it now. I kept the photo I took that morning, the one with the dents. It looks normal when you first open it, but if you tilt the screen just right, a faint shape appears near the corner. Long, blurred, like something halfway there. Jess says she's never seen it, even when I show it to her in person. I survived that night. But I don't sleep easily anymore. And every time heavy snow hits the roof, I hear that old rhythm returning through the cold metal. 3 steps, pause, 2 steps, like someone reminding me they still know where to find me. If you ever hear that pattern on your own roof in a storm, don't ignore it the way I did. It's not the snow you need to worry about. Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. I used to think winter quieted the world in a way nothing else could, especially out in Wise where the mountains lean in close and the nights feel stitched with old stories. After my grandmother died, I threw myself into my routine at the elementary school, grading spelling tests late, organizing lesson plans, pretending the stillness of my little rental house at the edge of Hollow Creek didn't bother me. Most evenings I'd sit by the window with a cup of Food Lion peppermint tea, watching the ridgeline blur into dusk. That December, in the middle of another long freeze, I saw a woman standing out by the tree line. A small figure, wrapped in a shawl like folks used to wear, just brushing snow off a rock in slow circles. I blinked, and she was gone. But the motion stuck with me, this gentle sweeping I couldn't shake, almost like she was wiping dust from something delicate. That night, the guilt came back the way it always did when the cold settled deep, the kind that tasted like copper on my tongue when I remembered ignoring my grandmother's last voicemail. She'd wanted me to visit before the winter storms hit, but I kept putting it off, saying I'd come next weekend, then the next. I kept a small token from her beside my bed, a little wooden bird she carved when I was a kid, and I swear I'd left it facing the window that evening. After dinner, I found it turned toward the door instead, like it was listening, but I told myself I was being dramatic. Grief makes you see meaning in anything, even a piece of wood sitting slightly wrong on a nightstand. I probably could have dismissed all of it if the blizzard hadn't rolled in so hard the next morning. They closed the school early, and as I was packing my bag, I recorded a short video for my students about their reading assignment. When I played it back before sending it, I heard it. This faint hum behind my voice, soft and lilting, like a woman singing. I listened again with my ear pressed to the phone until my skin prickled. The melody curled in my stomach in a way I knew too well. My grandmother used to hum that tune on long car rides, an old hymn her mother taught her. Come home where the warmth don't reach. I took the phone to the principal, Mr. Lowry, but he just chuckled, saying the vents in the classrooms made all kinds of weird noises. When I pressed him to listen again, the recording was silent. No hum, no voice, just me talking too fast with grief sitting heavy behind my teeth. By the time I got home that afternoon, the wind was spilling down the hollow in long howls that rattled the glass panes. Snow hit the roof like handfuls of salt. Around 4, the lights flickered, and I went to check the breaker box. On my way back, I heard something brush the kitchen window. This soft, swaying sound, almost like someone dragging fabric across the glass. When I looked out, all I saw was white swirling like a shaken snow globe, but the brushing didn't stop. It moved from pane to pane, slow, like fingertips searching for a seam. My breath clouded the window, and in the fog I thought I saw a shape, small, shawled, leaning close. A cold draft snakes up your spine when you see a familiar silhouette where no one should be, especially one shaped like the person you miss most. At dusk, the power went out. The house felt instantly colder, the kind where the chill seems to rise from the floorboards. I lit a candle and went to open the front window just a crack to check for storm damage. The instant the cold air rushed in, I heard it carried on the wind. Voices, layered and distant, singing that old hymn in a wavering harmony. Not one voice, but many, rising and falling like a choir tucked deep in the mountains. My grandmother's tone was the strongest, that thin, steady hum she used to have when she shelled beans or braided my hair. Come home where the warmth don't reach. The words threaded through the wind. I slammed the window shut so hard the candle flickered out. My heartbeat felt like it was stumbling over itself. The voices didn't stop. They circled the house the way wind does in a holler, swelling near one wall, then drifting to the next. Every time I pressed my palms over my ears, the copper taste in my mouth got stronger, like the hymn was vibrating in my jawbone. At one point, I tried calling my mother, but when she picked up, she insisted she couldn't hear anything in the background even though the choir was filling the whole house. She asked if I'd been sleeping enough, her tone gentle but dismissive, in that way that makes you shrink a little. When I hung up, the voices pressed closer, and I swear the wooden bird on my nightstand had turned again, this time pointing its beak toward the back door. Around midnight, the singing changed. The voices dipped lower, like they were whispering under the melody, and I felt this pull in my chest, a heat that didn't match the cold air. I walked to the back door without meaning to, candle shaking in my hand. The snow outside swirled in perfect circles, like something was breathing just out of sight. In the glass pane, I saw a reflection, my grandmother standing behind me, face soft, eyes bright the way they were before memory took pieces of her. She lifted her hand and brushed snow off an invisible rock in that same gentle circle I'd seen earlier. I spun around, but the room was empty. When I turned back, her face in the reflection had changed. Longer, hollowed, mouth open like she was singing her lungs out. I backed away fast, stumbling over the coffee table and bruising my shin so hard the mark stayed for months. I grabbed my phone again and hit record, whispering, "Please stop. Please, just stop." The wind roared, the voices swelled, and the hymn rose so sharply it felt like the air was splitting. Then everything cut off. Silence hit so hard my ears rang. I kept recording until the battery died. When the storm finally passed, I listened to the video. What I heard wasn't silence. It was the hymn, faint, distorted, woven with static like something pushing through layers of air. Come home where the warmth don't reach. Every time I send it to someone else, it arrives blank. I'm still teaching. Life goes on in that stubborn Appalachian way. But when the heavy snows roll in, and the wind comes down the hollow just right, I swear I hear them singing again. If you ever hear a hymn in the wind, especially one meant for you, don't open the window. Some invitations aren't meant to be answered. I spent most of my 40th year driving home alone before sunrise, the whole world feeling like an empty waiting room with only my headlights for company. Night shifts at the hazard hospital had a way of stripping you down until you were mostly caffeine, aches, and the promise of a warm bed. 5 years ago, during that blizzard, I was following my usual lonely route along the mountain road, the one with nothing but a drop on one side and black trees on the other, when I saw a man standing by the ridge. Just a still figure, too thin for the heavy coat he wore, tapping the top of a wooden post like he was checking its alignment. Something about the steady rhythm bothered me, though I didn't know why then. It looked so harmless, that little gesture, almost like a bored chore. I blinked once through the blowing snow and he was gone, but the tapping sound seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. Maybe it was the guilt twisting inside me, the memory of that time I drifted off behind the wheel and could have killed someone. Ever since then, I'd watched the road too closely, always waiting for the next mistake. When I finally clocked out and got into my old Honda, I kept rubbing the rim of the steering wheel where a tiny plastic charm hung. An angel my daughter clipped on, to keep you awake, Mama. It was my token, I guess, something small to remind me to be careful. Leaving the parking lot, I could already taste that metallic tang of exhaustion at the back of my throat, the same taste I'd had the night I dozed off years earlier and crossed the center line. It still woke me up sometimes, that jolt of headlights in the wrong place, the shame of knowing your body betrayed you. I told myself I was okay. I told myself the hot Speedway coffee would keep me steady all the way home. Maybe 10 minutes into the drive, with snow swirling so hard the world felt like cotton stuffed against the windshield, I noticed the first odd thing. A reflector, one of those red shoulder markers, glowing through the whiteout ahead. It was so bright it looked plugged into something, pulsing almost, and it sat too close to the center line. I eased off the gas and told myself the plows probably put it there earlier, even though this road never had markers on the cliffside. I passed it slow, the light almost hurting my eyes, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror, it seemed to lag behind a second before fading back into the snow. I shrugged it off. Sleep deprivation plays tricks, especially when you're dragging yourself home on fumes of nerves and caffeine. A few bends later, I saw it again. Same impossible brightness, same pulsing glow, sitting on the right shoulder like it was waiting for me. I stopped long enough to snap a picture with my phone, thinking maybe I'd ask the road crew about it later, and then kept going. But when I checked the photo at the next stop sign, the screen showed nothing except blurred snow and a faint streak of red that looked smeared, almost oily. I showed the picture to my coworker, Marla, when I saw her the next night. She squinted at it and said she didn't see anything strange at all, even though I swore I'd captured the marker dead center. When she handed my phone back, she laughed lightly and asked if maybe I'd nodded off. The dismissal stung in a way I didn't expect. Being told exhaustion was in my head felt too close to that old mistake. Driving home again after another shift, the storm was worse. Snow came sideways, scraping across the car like handfuls of gravel. My breath kept fogging the windshield vents, and the cold air burned inside my nose. That's when the reflector appeared for the third time, hovering right at the edge of the road, so bright it cut through the swirl like a red sun. The sight jolted something awake in me. I hit the brakes hard, tires sliding until the car fishtailed. When the skidding stopped, I realized the car's rear wheels were inches from the drop-off. I hadn't drifted. I had followed the reflector's lead. It had been placed exactly where a guardrail should have been, coaxing me closer, almost like it wanted me to trust it. The cold in the car felt like fingers wrapped around my throat for a moment. The wind pushed against the driver's side, rocking the car gently, and in that rocking I saw movement. The red glow didn't stay still. It shifted, just a hair, tilting toward the cliff like someone beyond the snow line was nudging it. My heart hammered so fast I thought I'd black out. I tried to reverse, tried to breathe slow, but my mind filled with that old memory of dozing off, that near accident, the shame I never fully swallowed. I whispered, "Stay awake, stay awake, stay awake," like a mantra, as if the mountain itself was testing me again. When I finally pulled forward onto safer ground, something slapped the rear bumper, a sharp thud that made me scream. I forced myself to check the mirror. Through the snow, the reflector sat dead center in the lane behind me, glowing bright as a match head in gasoline. I watched it hold still for several seconds before the glow began to dim. Only it didn't fade normally. It shrank, tightening into a pinpoint until it was no bigger than a star, and then blinked out completely. The dark that followed felt personal. When I got home, I found a bruise across my forearm shaped like a thin crescent, as though something had gripped me hard while I was fighting the wheel. It stayed for nearly 2 weeks, yellowing slow like a stubborn reminder. And the picture on my phone? The red smear kept changing shape every time I opened it. Once it looked like a bent stick, once like a hook, and once, this was the worst, like a tiny, perfect circle hovering at the cliff edge. I don't take that road anymore. I don't care if it adds 20 minutes to my mornings. Cold air still carries the smell of burnt rubber when I think too hard about that night. And sometimes, on long drives, I catch a flash of red in the corner of my eye. If you ever see a reflector glowing too bright through a whiteout, brighter than any road marker should be, don't follow it. Some lights aren't meant to guide you home. I'd been living alone on the ridge above the old Logan mine for almost a year, keeping to a routine most folks would call empty, but it suited the kind of man I'd become. Quiet mornings with Folgers in a chipped mug, afternoons watching the wind push snow across the clearing, nights spent listening to the house settle like it had bones of its own. Isolation felt easier than people after losing my wife and the men I'd worked beside underground, and the blizzard last winter only pushed the world farther away until it felt like nothing existed except my cabin, the shaft, and the dark between. That night, just before midnight, I saw a figure out by the mine road. Someone small, hunched, tapping a stick against a fence post in this lazy little rhythm that reminded me too much of the rescue pattern we used to teach the new boys. I remember thinking it was just a local kid messing around. Later, I realized that was the first innocent detail that came back to haunt me. My evenings weren't complicated back then. I drank too much Evan Williams, stared at the television until the images blurred, and kept the volume low enough that I could still hear the wind searching along the siding. The guilt had settled into my life, the way cold settles into joints. Quiet at first, then constant, then part of me. I survived the collapse 2 winters before my wife died. and sometimes I swear the guilt breathed louder than I did. That night, while the storm thickened outside, the clock hit midnight, and there came a knocking on the side door, the one facing the mine road. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more, the same old rhythm we used underground to say, "Alive, here, help." I told myself it was the wind slamming loose siding. But the house was still, and the knocks were too clean, too deliberate. I sat there holding my breath like a coward, the metallic taste of fear crawling up my throat. The next morning, the first uncanny thing showed itself in a way so small I almost convinced myself it didn't happen. The snow prints leading from the tree line to my side door were too deep, too sharp, like someone had stomped through fresh powder minutes before I stepped outside. But the wind had been ripping all night. Those prints should have blurred or filled, not sat there crisp as a photograph. I snapped a picture on my phone because the cold air made me doubt my own memory these days. By noon the prints were gone, erased perfectly smooth, and when I showed the picture to my neighbor Earl later, he squinted, shook his head, said it looked like nothing but shadow and drift. He'd been a miner too, worked with me 20 years back, and for a moment I thought I saw recognition in his eyes. But he blinked, shook it off, and said, "Buddy, you've been drinking too hard again." That night, the wind dropped to almost nothing, a deep quiet that made my ears ring. Then came the knocking again, right at midnight. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. This time I went to the kitchen with the intention of flinging open that door and telling whoever it was to knock it off. But as soon as I touched the knob, the cold coming through the wood hit me harder than winter should have allowed. It smelled like wet rock and old air, that same stale scent the rescue crew pulled up with the bodies years ago. My hand jerked back, and I noticed a dark bruise blooming across my wrist, a perfect circle like something had gripped me even though I hadn't felt a thing. I didn't sleep after that. I just sat in the armchair with the lights on, listening to the walls groan while the metallic taste kept licking the back of my mouth. The third confrontation came when the generator cut out around 2 in the morning, leaving me in that thick blackness you only find far from town. Blackness so total, it feels like a weight. My phone flashlight shook in my hand while I made my way to the back window, and through the frost I saw someone standing near the mine road, motionless, head tilted like he was listening for something under the snow. When my light hit the glass, he looked straight at me, but his eyes didn't catch the beam right. They stayed dark, flat, wrong. When I blinked, he was gone, and the only sound was that slow, familiar knocking starting up a few yards from the door. I backed away, muttering to myself like a madman, hearing my own breath shuddering in the dark. By the 4th night of the storm, the knocking didn't wait for midnight. It started early, steady, patient, the rhythm sinking into the house beams like it belonged there. I tried recording it on my phone because I needed proof I wasn't slipping the way folks whispered about, but the moment I hit playback, all I heard was a low, dragging noise, like stone sliding over stone. I brought it to Earl the next morning, desperate for him to hear what I heard, but he just frowned at the phone and said it was wind distortion. He even claimed he'd stopped by the night before to check on me, and heard nothing unusual. That denial cut deeper than the knocks did. It made me realize whatever was reaching for me came from the same hole I'd climbed out of while better men didn't, and the world wasn't going to believe it even if it crawled into the daylight. When the storm finally eased enough for the plows to clear the main road, I drove straight into town with the bruise on my wrist still dark as coal dust and the recording warped beyond reason. I planned to stay with my sister a few days, catch my breath, maybe sober up enough to think straight. But on the first night there, just after midnight, from the far end of her hallway, where the house faced the distant ridge, I heard 3 knocks, Pause. 3 more. Soft, patient, unmistakable. My sister lifted her head like she'd heard something, then frowned, shook it off, and said it was probably the pipes cooling. I've still got the bruise, faint now but perfectly shaped, and the recording remains scrambled with that stone-dragging sound no matter how many times I resave it. Every winter since, the knocking returns, always from the side of whichever house or motel room points toward the mine road. I don't drink as much now. It doesn't make a difference either way. The only warning I can give you is simple. If you ever hear that slow rescue rhythm in a winter storm, don't answer, and don't look toward the mine road. It remembers who lived. Most mornings last winter started the same. Me half awake at 5, packing Ella's lunch with shaking hands while the house still felt too big and too quiet around us. I worked the early shift at the Ace Hardware near the highway, so the world outside our Johnson City townhouse was nothing but a dim, snow-choked parking lot and the muffled hum of plows passing in the distance. Parenting alone makes life feel like a tunnel, just one long stretch of routine with no room to mess up. And I carried that fear like a weight. That morning, through the sliding glass door that looked out over our tiny backyard, I saw a small figure standing in the snow, barefoot, brushing their hand slowly along the railing like they were feeling for something. I blinked, and the yard was empty except for the drift. I told myself it was the wind playing tricks on me, one of those harmless moments you forget. But later, that simple gesture of a hand brushing across a railing would come back in a way that made my stomach knot. By afternoon, after dropping Ella at my sister's for the evening, I was back at the house trying to stay awake long enough to sort laundry and check the pipes. Single dad life meant being on guard all the time. Double-checking locks, glancing outside at every noise, keeping the thermostat higher than I could afford, so Ella wouldn't wake up cold. The guilt of not being enough never really slept either. When I trudged up the stairs with an armful of towels, the storm flickered the hallway light and made the shadows stretch weird. But I didn't think much of it until my foot slid out from under me. I came down hard on my elbow, right into a small mound of snow sitting neatly at the bottom step. The windows were sealed. The back door was locked. Nothing made sense. I wiped my palm across it and felt the unmistakable gritty cold of fresh snow, and the metallic taste of panic climbed up into my mouth as fast as the iciness soaked through my socks. Still, I rationalized it. Maybe I'd tracked it in and just forgotten. Sleep deprivation does things to your memory. Later that night, after I cleaned up the mess, I found something even stranger while walking toward the kitchen. A trail of wet footprints leading from the hallway to the living room rug. They were too small to be mine, too narrow, the toes too pointed. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture because I knew exhaustion was messing with me, and proof felt like the only anchor I had left. But by the time I picked up Ella from my sister's and showed her the photo the next morning, the prints in the picture looked wrong. Stretched, blurred, more like smudges of light than actual footprints. My sister squinted at it, shook her head, and said it looked like a spill I'd photographed by accident. She even laughed and said, "You're overthinking again," and the dismissal stung deeper than I expected. I realized how alone I was in this house, how close I felt to losing control over something I couldn't name. Over the next few days, the house took on an edge I couldn't shake. The cold seemed to gather in the hallway no matter how high I turned up the heat. And sometimes I'd catch the faint scent of winter air right in the middle of the living room. At night, when the storm pushed hard against the siding, I heard the soft patter of something moving in the hall, like small wet feet stepping carefully across the laminate. Once, when I got up to check on Ella after she whimpered in her sleep, I saw a child-sized shape crouched on the landing above me. The air warped around it like heat rising off pavement. I froze, breath caught in my throat, and in one blink it was gone, leaving only a small splash of melting snow where it had been. My heart hammered so hard I had to hold the wall, whispering to myself just to keep from spiraling. Another night, after a late shift during the peak of the blizzard, I came in carrying grocery bags and immediately felt cold air brush the side of my neck, soft enough to mimic a fingertip. I spun around too fast and hit my shoulder on the wall, a sharp pain blooming there like a bruise. The air down the hallway shimmered with faint particles, like someone had shaken snow in the dark. My breath came out in short, almost panicked bursts as I listened to the faint drip of melting slush from somewhere near the stairs. The cold pressed into me in a way that made my bones ache, and I swear I heard the tiny padded sound of a foot lifting and settling just beyond my view. The worst moment came when Ella woke up crying from a nightmare, and I ran into her room to find her pointing at her open closet door. Snowflakes glimmered on her carpet, fragile and real, fading before I could gather them in my hand. She told me she'd seen a girl with wet hair sitting inside the closet, whispering. But when I asked her again the next morning, she said she'd been too sleepy to remember anything. She denied everything with the soft confusion only kids have, and I didn't push her. I didn't want to hear a truth that would undo me. I still have the bruise on my shoulder. Pale now, but shaped like small fingers had pressed into me hard enough to leave their mark. And the photo of those footprints on my phone is still wrong. The light in it warped in a way that makes the hallway look deeper than it should be, like there's another room behind it that doesn't exist. I tried deleting the photo twice, but it always reappeared in a different folder. These days, even though the storm has long passed, I still wake some mornings to a small puddle of melted snow sitting quietly at the foot of the stairs. And if I'm up too early, before the house fully warms, sometimes I feel that cold brushing across my neck again, gentle as a child's hand. If you ever find snow inside your home with no explanation, don't follow the footprints. Don't let them lead you where they want you to look. I'd been a park ranger in the Blue Ridge for so long that the quiet felt like a second skin, something I slipped into every morning with my uniform and thermos of motel-grade coffee. Isolation didn't bother me much back then, not even after Mark died on that muddy trail 3 years ago, though I still carried the guilt like a weight in my chest. It was a winter night, mid-shift, wind chewing through the trees and snow coming down in hard diagonal sheets, when I saw the first wrong thing. A small warm glow bobbing along the ridge like someone carrying a lantern. Nobody should have been out there, especially not swinging an old-fashioned oil lamp in that kind of weather. And the strange part was how steady the flame looked, like the wind didn't exist at all. I noticed something else too. Something I brushed off at the time. My radio crackled with a soft humming sound, almost like someone breathing, then went quiet again. I'd been stationed near Pine Gap, a cabin built decades before I was born, a place with no porch, no trees close enough to cast shadows, and just one frost-bitten trail curling around it like a scar. Most nights I'd make rounds with a practiced rhythm, checking the generator, jotting down the temperature, tapping the barometer like it would talk back. After Mark's fall, the routine was all I had to keep my mind still, though I never admitted it out loud. When the glow appeared again just beyond the cabin, I convinced myself it was only someone's lost camper light. But as I stepped outside and the cold punched through my jacket, I noticed the snow falling straight and hard, without any swirl near the lantern, as if something invisible was sheltering that little flame. I felt a metallic taste coat my tongue then, sharp and cold, like biting down on a coin, and I told myself it was just nerves. The next morning the storm eased and sunlight spread thin across the drifts, but the air felt heavy in a way I couldn't describe. I spotted fresh footprints leading toward the cabin, even though no one had checked in for days, and when I followed them, they simply stopped 3 feet from the wall. No turn, no return trail, just vanished. I took a photo on my phone, thinking maybe I'd show it to Terry, my supervisor, or at least keep it for proof that the snow wasn't making me imagine things. Later that afternoon, when I scrolled back through my pictures, the image was wrong. The snow looked smooth, untouched, and in the center was a faint light smear like someone dragged a small glowing brush across the screen. Terry shrugged and said my phone probably glitched from the cold. His tone made me feel childish, like I'd brought him a ghost story I should have known better than to believe. That night, the wind returned, growling around the cabin until the windows trembled. I tried to read the logs Mark had written the week before he died, though I didn't know why I still carried them around. He'd always said Pine Gap had a strange quiet to it, as if the woods held their breath around certain people. Around midnight, the same glow appeared again, hanging just beyond the corner of the building. But this time, the lantern swung slowly side to side, casting a warm oval of light that never dimmed despite gusts that rattled the roof. My hands shook when I stepped out into the snow, and the metallic taste returned so strong I almost spat it out. Each step toward the lantern felt heavier, and the light stayed the same distance away no matter how far I walked, like it was leading me somewhere, and waiting for me to catch on. When I finally stopped, the glow brightened just a little, enough for me to see the imprint of a hand in the snow at my feet. Not a full handprint, just the shapes of fingertips pressed deep, as if someone had crouched there minutes before. I whispered Mark's name before I could stop myself, and the lantern drew closer, swaying like a nod. My breath hitched in a fast, uneasy rhythm, and for a minute I felt like the storm had collapsed into silence around me, leaving only the tiny circle of warm light in a world of cold and white. I turned back toward the cabin, but a soft voice brushed my ear, a small exhale of sound shaped like my name. I ran then, stumbling through the drifts until my lungs burned, and when I slammed the door, the lantern glowed through the window for one long moment before fading into the storm. I told Terry the next morning, hoping he'd at least acknowledge something strange was going on, but he only gave me a careful look and said I should take a few days off. He mentioned grief counseling in a stiff, uncomfortable tone, as if Mark's death was a box he didn't want to open. Later, when I checked the window, I noticed a faint reddish mark on my wrist, a thin line like something had brushed me hard enough to raise the skin. No memory of how it happened. It never faded. The metallic taste lingered too, showing up at odd moments, usually when the wind shifted from the north. On my final night at Pine Gap, before they reassigned me to lower elevations, the lantern returned again. The storm was calmer this time, snow drifting more gently, and the glow rested directly outside the cabin where no hook or branch existed. The flame didn't flicker, just burned steady and warm like a heartbeat in the cold. I opened the door slowly, stepping into air that felt watched, and I whispered that I was sorry. Sorry I hadn't been with Mark. Sorry he died alone. Sorry I'd run every time something reminded me of that night. The lantern brightened once more and then drifted backward, settling deep into the woods before disappearing completely. When I looked down, I noticed another hand-shaped impression in the snow. This one smaller, almost gentle, as if someone had steadied themselves while listening. I've since moved to a busier section of the park, closer to towns and radios that don't hiss with breath-like sounds, but the mark on my wrist never disappeared, and that old photo on my phone still shows the smear of pale light. Sometimes on late winter nights, I see a glow between the trees far off the trail, steady and warm, like someone waiting for me to acknowledge something I've been avoiding. If you ever hike the Blue Ridge in winter, and you spot a lantern flame that doesn't flicker, don't follow it, and don't call out. It listens closely to anyone who does. I'd been living alone for only 2 weeks after the breakup when the storm rolled into Summersville, thick and low like a bruise on the sky, and the house felt bigger than it had any right to. Working as a veterinary assistant meant I was used to long, quiet hours and routine tasks, but losing him left this strange hollow in me that the silence kept poking at. My rental sat at the edge of a wooded stretch, just one crooked gravel road leading out to Route 19. And on that first night I noticed something odd. A stray dog sitting at the tree line, watching my back door. It didn't move, didn't bark, just stared as if waiting for me to notice something. I even waved at it like an idiot, thinking it was lost, but it stayed perfectly still, and I remember the innocent detail that stuck out. Wet leaves clung to its fur in oddly neat patches, like someone had pressed them there on purpose. By the time the wind picked up, rattling the gutters and sending branches tapping the siding, I'd settled into the sort of numb routine I used to rely on after long shifts. Microwave dinner, cheap TV glow, folding laundry I should have done days earlier. I didn't see the first set of scratches until I flicked on the porch light to grab the recycling bin. Deep gouges sliced across the bottom half of the back door, long and curved like something with too many joints had raked it. I laughed under my breath, assuming it was just raccoons or a bear cub, and I crouched down to get a closer look. That's when the smell hit me. Wet dog mixed with rotten leaves, the kind of scent that sinks into your clothes. I cleaned the door with a sponge, telling myself it was no big deal. But when I turned away to grab another towel and glanced back, fresh marks had appeared right where I'd wiped. The next morning I tried photographing them for the landlord, but the image on my phone looked wrong. Instead of the bright grooves I'd seen, the photo showed faint shadows curling outward like smoke captured mid-motion. My coworker CJ stopped by to drop off some flea meds I'd left in her car, and I asked her to look at the door. She tilted her head, squinted at the wood, and said she didn't see anything except a couple scuffs from weather. I tried pointing right at the spots, tracing them with my finger, but she stepped back, saying maybe the breakup was getting to me and I needed rest. That stung more than I let on. Later, when she texted me, she didn't even mention the scratches, like the whole visit had been normal. That night, the smell seeped into the kitchen again, faint at first, and then strong enough to make my eyes water. The wind shoved hard against the walls, and something skittered across the porch boards with a sharp, uneven rhythm. I stood by the back door with my hand on the knob, listening, and the sound stopped the second I leaned in. When I turned my head toward the sink, something scraped once, slow, deliberate, and I jerked back so fast my shoulder hit the fridge. The door had new gouges, deeper this time, the wood curling outward like tiny splinters of bone. My breath came in small, panicked bursts, and I muttered to myself that animals move fast, that storms make noises weird, that I hadn't slept right since the breakup anyway. But when I put my ear to the door, I heard breathing on the other side, quick and wet like something excited. Around midnight, the lights flickered, and the house seemed to inhale and exhale with the storm, settling and creaking in a rhythm that made me think of something pacing outside. I grabbed my old mag light and edged toward the back door, moving slow because I didn't want whatever was there to know I was listening. The smell seeped through the cracks, stronger than ever, and the scratches multiplied as I watched, appearing in fast, jerky lines like invisible fingers dragging down the wood. I slammed my hand against the door and yelled for whoever, or whatever was there to stop. For a split second, everything went silent. Then something thudded against the door hard enough to rattle dust from the ceiling. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the kitchen chair, and the light outside blinked in a quick stuttering pattern, like it was warning me. When the storm peaked, thunder rolling so close it felt like the house lifted for a breath, I thought I saw the outline of the stray dog again through the curtain. Only taller, or maybe standing wrong somehow. The porch light flickered, and the shape lowered itself, almost folding in half, and a low chuffing sound rattled the window pane. I grabbed my phone to record it, but the screen refused to focus, smearing the figure into streaks of dark green and brown, like the damp woods themselves had pressed into the glass. My heartbeat felt like it matched the thunder, and for a moment all I could smell was wet fur and decaying leaves, thick enough that it coated my tongue and made me gag. When lightning lit the yard, the shape vanished, but the scratches kept appearing behind me, one by one, as if something crawled just out of sight. By morning, the storm thinned into a cold drizzle, and I found a long bruise on my forearm, narrow and curved like a hooked claw had pressed there while I slept. I called animal control, voice shaking, and the officer who came out walked around the yard like he expected to find a mangy hound, or maybe a bear. He sniffed the air once, said he didn't smell anything unusual, and told me storms make wildlife bold and people nervous. He didn't even write a report. When he left, I checked the back door again, and the scratches were shallow, almost polite, like faint reminders that deepened only when my eyes drifted away for a second too long. I kept the strange photo on my phone even though it creeped me out, that smear of shadow that wouldn't sharpen no matter what filter I tried. Sometimes I swear the streaks have shifted, curling more toward the center like something leaning close to the lens. The bruise on my arm healed into a small crescent-shaped mark that never fully faded, a pale outline that warms when storms gather over the hills. I don't live in that house anymore, but each winter when the first snowfall hits, the scent of wet dog and rotten leaves finds me somehow, drifting into rooms where it shouldn't be. If you ever see scratches on a back door that change when you aren't looking, don't turn away. Whatever causes them likes when you do. I'd been running the night shift at the Speedway off US 421 in Harlan for so many years that the hours had worn themselves into my bones. And on storm nights, the place felt like a little glass box floating in the middle of a white, endless nowhere. 5 years ago, during that blizzard, I was 62 and already counting down the months to retirement, half ashamed of how much the quiet suited me. The routine kept my mind from drifting back to my son, the one I lost decades earlier. But the cold had a way of poking holes in my defenses. The storm that night was bad enough to bury the road signs, and I was checking the coffee station for the third time when the bell above the door jingled, even though I didn't see anyone come in. I remember thinking it was just the wind, but the innocent detail that stuck with me was that the bell swayed for a long time, like a small hand had held it. Most nights I'd keep myself busy with inventory sheets and wiping down the counter, the kind of work that distracts you just enough to feel normal. I carried my son's old pocket knife in my shirt pocket, a rusted little thing I pretended was just a habit, though it grounded me more than I admitted. A few minutes after the bell chimed, I noticed the knife lying open on the counter, even though I knew I hadn't touched it. My stomach tightened with that strange mix of fear and old grief that always came when I thought of him, and I snapped the knife shut, telling myself I must have set it down without thinking. I'd been tired all week, more fog-brained than usual, so I wrote it off as another sign I'd been working too many winters. But I started hearing something after that, the crunch of snow under small shoes, then silence, then one soft breath from the direction of the snack aisle. I flicked my eyes toward the convex security mirror and saw a shape standing between the chips and the beef jerky. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, bundled in a thin jacket smeared with slush. His reflection lagged a half-second behind his movement, like the mirror couldn't keep up. When I turned around, he was gone, and the aisle was empty except for the sound of the cooler humming behind me. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself exhaustion does strange things, especially to old men with too much guilt. Still, I felt the cold draft he brought with him long after. A little later, I pretended to be checking the Nebo flashlights by the register when the boy finally appeared for real. Or at least I believed he was real at the time. He stood just inside the door, shoulders hunched, holding one glove in his hand like he'd forgotten which pocket it belonged to. His voice was thin, almost papery. "It's cold out. Can you walk me home?" That sentence split me open in a way nothing else had in years. I wanted to say yes because I'd failed my own son once, and some part of me believed helping this boy might patch that wound. But before I could speak, he looked over, his shoulder at the snow dark outside as if something waited for him there, and when I blinked, he wasn't standing in front of me anymore. The security cameras caught a flicker of motion near the drink cooler, and I replayed it twice before the screen went static. The grainy footage glitched into a single still frame. The boy standing inches from the lens, pale face blurred like a smudge on a window. When I showed it to Earl, the district manager, he said the storm must have shorted the feed and suggested I take a few nights off if I was seeing ghosts in the soda section. He deleted the clip before I could stop him, but a corrupted thumbnail stayed on the monitor afterward. Just a shape, but a shape that never fully disappeared, no matter how many times we rebooted. Around midnight, the power flickered, and the store went quiet in that deep, heavy way that feels like holding your breath. I walked toward the back office to check the breakers, and halfway there I felt a small tug at my jacket sleeve. Not a draft, not a snag, a hand. My knees buckled so fast I had to grab the mop bucket to steady myself, and for a second I swear I smelled winter air and damp wool, the same scent my son carried the night before we lost him. I whispered, "Where are you?" Because some part of me didn't care anymore whether I was talking to a ghost or a memory. When the lights clicked back on, a small handprint, cold as ice, lingered on my sleeve and raised a welt on my skin that burned for days afterward. Near closing, the boy appeared behind the counter, not walking, not stepping, just there, turning my son's pocket knife over in his palm. He set it down in front of me with the same soft motion a child uses to return a borrowed pencil. I blinked, and he was standing at the door again, glove in hand, snow swirling behind him. "It's cold out," he said. "Can you walk me home?" This time I stepped toward him, fast, desperate almost, but when I reached the doorway he'd vanished into the storm, leaving only a pair of wet footprints that melted before I could photograph them. I still carry the mark on my arm, a faint blue crescent where his fingers pressed, a bruise that never fully faded. And tucked in my locker is a printout of the corrupted camera frame. The boy's face a smear of motion, the shape of him leaning closer each time I look. I've retired now, but I still drive past that speedway on snowy nights and find myself unlocking the door, letting the warm air spill out into the cold like an invitation. I tell myself it's a habit or maybe guilt, but if you ever hear a bell jingle when no one walks in, don't turn your back on the doorway. Some children come in out of the storm looking for someone who won't leave them again. I've spent a lot of nights alone on the outskirts of Norton, Virginia, hauling coal across icy roads and staring at the same metal roof over my little cabin. And last winter it felt like the world had frozen in place. I was 38, divorced, and insomnia was gnawing at me worse than the deep freeze. That first night I heard it, the metal creaking in slow, deliberate steps above my head. At first I thought it was just the wind, or maybe the house settling, but the sound was rhythmic, patient, and wrong. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling despite the thick wool gloves, and that's when I saw them. Barefoot prints circling my roof, snow pressed into the corrugated metal in tight loops, as though someone had been walking just for me to notice. The detail that made my stomach twist was small, a single footprint offset slightly from the others, like the person had paused to look down at me. Ordinary life had already frayed me. My routine was the only thing keeping me from thinking about Amy, or the betrayal that ended my marriage, and the cabin felt safer when I could see everything in predictable lines. I grabbed a broom and tried to sweep the snow off the roof from the ladder, but the prints remained, steaming faintly in the cold, as if someone warm had just been there. I called my neighbor, Ronnie, to check the pattern with me. He muttered, "Looks like animals," though his eyes darted to the ladder like he didn't want to admit the footprints were bigger than a raccoon's, and by the time I went back inside, the steaming marks had faded, leaving only that haunting circular rhythm. That night, as I tried to sleep, I kept hearing tiny shuffles and the soft scrape of nails against metal. I rationalized, of course, telling myself exhaustion and stress were warping reality. But the prints always reappeared in the morning snow, precisely in the same circular pattern. I started photographing them, documenting each night. But when I reviewed the photos later, the images were corrupted in the same place. Smudges across the roofline where the prints should have been. Even Ronnie shrugged them off, saying cameras can't handle frost. But the image persisted on my phone, distorted, wrong in a way that felt deliberate. I realized then that no one would believe me, and the isolation I'd tolerated my whole life began to crush me. One night, I decided to stay up until I saw the figure. The wind was screaming through the trees, rattling the metal siding like the house itself was alive, and I swore I could feel someone pacing above me. I climbed to the roof in the dark, flashlight in hand, and that's when I saw a shadow move against the snow, too human in shape, yet impossibly light. I froze as it stopped and leaned over the edge, just staring, before melting into the night without a sound. I came down shaking, my palms raw from gripping the ladder, and noticed a faint bruise forming along my forearm, bluish in the cold air. Mark that stayed, proof that my fear had been physical, not just imagined. The nights kept escalating. Footprints appeared closer together, smaller and lighter at times, circling not only the roof but the eaves, testing the edges of my vision. I began leaving notes on the porch, asking the person to leave me be, as though writing could negotiate with whatever haunted the roofline. One note disappeared overnight, replaced by a smear of wet snow and the faintest trace of a warm body imprint against the door. I called the sheriff to ask if anyone had been spotted near my cabin. He laughed, said it was probably kids playing in the snow. That dismissal, that casual shrug of authority, made me feel even smaller, more exposed. Each morning, I would find the prints steaming slightly, as if mocking me for my helplessness. The final encounter that winter came after a storm so fierce, I thought the roof would cave under its own weight. I had my flashlight and a baseball bat in hand, teeth chattering, heart racing. The footsteps started almost immediately after I climbed onto the ladder. This time I saw them clearly. A figure, barefoot, circling deliberately, pausing to look at me each time it completed a loop. I tried to shout, to swing, to grab it, but each time I blinked it vanished, leaving only steaming impressions behind, circling endlessly. I tumbled down in panic, scraping my shoulder against the metal siding, another mark that stayed raw and bruised long after the snow melted. The house was silent after that, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave, a tremor in my bones that sleep couldn't soothe. I survived the winter, but I haven't recovered. Every snowfall now, I climb onto the roof, flashlight ready, heart in my throat, only to find the same circular prints steaming faintly into the metal, waiting for me. I still photograph them, still watch them fade, still feel the cold and the weight of invisible eyes. The notebook I keep by the bed is smudged and warped in places, the prints on each page shifting slightly each time I open it. And I know that some things in the world don't care if you're a grown man, insomniac or not, divorced and lonely. They will trace the same pattern over and over, reminding you of what you can't protect. If you ever hear metal creak in the deep freeze and see tracks steaming on the roof, don't go up to confront it. Just wait inside and pray the footsteps keep moving without finding you. I've been alone on this patch of Boone farmland for years, tending the fields and the few stubborn cattle that survived the winters, ever since my wife died, and left a silence in the house that felt heavier than snow. I was 53, hands cracked and smelling of manure most days, and the snowstorm that hit 2 winters ago seemed like it would never end. I remember sitting by the stove, watching the wind whip across the old fence line, when I heard it. The bell. A clear, slow, deliberate ringing that cut through the blizzard, though the rope was frozen solid. At first I thought it was a trick of the wind, maybe an old branch scraping the metal, but the tone was steady, measured, almost conversational. There was something innocent about it, the kind of sound you might expect from a farm kid calling the cows. But beneath it was a pull, a summons I couldn't ignore. The bell had always been there, rusted and half forgotten, a relic from my grandfather's time, and normally I never gave it much thought. That night, though, it became a token, a signal that the loneliness I carried was dangerous. My wife had been gone for 2 years, and I had thought I could manage, that I could find peace in routine. But the bell, ringing in perfect intervals, forced me to remember the nights she stayed up comforting me, the warmth of her presence, and the emptiness that remained after her death. I walked outside into the wind, shaking, and the snow stung my face, but the bell's sound held me there, beckoning me down the frozen fence line towards the dark woods beyond. The first wrongness came when I noticed footprints in the snow, small, delicate impressions leading away from the fence toward the trees, though no one had come by, and the blizzard was still at full force. They were too precise, too human, and yet no one appeared when I called out. I told myself I was imagining it, that grief and exhaustion were painting shapes in the storm. But the tracks didn't lie. When I stepped closer to the bell, the rope began to move ever so slightly, though my fingers couldn't reach it, and the clanging continued in perfect, slow intervals. I shook my head and retreated to the house, trying to convince myself it was the wind or an animal trapped in the branches. But sleep wouldn't come that night. I kept hearing the faint metallic toll echoing through the drifts, pressing against my chest. Over the next few nights, the evidence became undeniable. The bell would ring even when the temperature was so low that the rope should have been frozen solid, and footprints would appear each time I ventured outside, always leading into the forest and circling back to the fence. I tried photographing the bell and the tracks, hoping to show my neighbor, Bill, that I wasn't losing my mind. When he looked at the pictures the next morning, he laughed nervously and said the images were corrupted, blurred in ways that didn't make sense. "Must be frost on the lens," he said, shrugging. But I knew better. The prints persisted in the snow, and the bell rang without wind. My isolation deepened, gnawing at the part of me that had already been hollowed by grief, and each night I felt compelled to step outside again, to see who or what was answering the call. The encounters escalated slowly but surely. One evening I went to check the bell, bundled against the wind, and for the first time I thought I saw a shadowy figure moving just beyond the tree line, limbs thin and barely distinguishable in the storm. My heart raced, and I stumbled over the snow, bruising my knee against a hidden rock, a mark that stayed raw for weeks. I called out, but the bell continued to ring as if mocking me, echoing between the woods and the fields. The second night, I heard a voice, faint and childlike, carried on the wind, asking me to come closer. My fingers were numb, my body shaking, yet I felt a pull so strong I almost obeyed. By the third night, I was pacing the fence line, bracing against the blizzard, convinced that the bell itself was alive, and that something was waiting for me in the woods, its presence invisible yet unbearably close. I tried to resist, stayed inside, tried to sleep, but the bell rang anyway, unrelenting, and the footprints would appear just beyond the fence. My notebook, where I recorded everything, the times, the snow depth, the intervals of the bell, became smudged and wet as if the snow itself had written over my words. Bill dismissed it when I showed him, calling it damp paper and frost. The isolation was absolute. Every sense I had sharpened, every instinct screamed that the land itself had taken on a consciousness, and I was trespassing in its attention. The bell rang with a certainty I couldn't fight, and I realized that the pull wasn't just curiosity. It was claiming me. The final night came like a tide. The blizzard was a white wall, and I couldn't hear anything else except the slow, perfect tolling of the bell. I wrapped my coat tightly, grabbed the lantern, and walked toward the sound. The snow crunched beneath my boots, each step carrying me closer to something I didn't understand but felt compelled to obey. I paused at the edge of the woods, feeling the pull in my chest and the hollow ache of my own emptiness, and then I stepped forward. The bell rang again, and the wind carried it into the trees as I disappeared into the storm. My lantern was found later, leaning against the fence, and the snow covered my tracks almost immediately. I left behind only the sound of the bell, ringing in perfect intervals, and the knowledge that loneliness can be a dangerous companion if you answer its call. If you ever hear the old dinner bell ring in the woods during a blizzard, don't follow it. Stay where you are and let it ring for someone else. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. And that wraps up our 10 Appalachian horror stories. Which one left you looking over your shoulder? If you made it all the way, type, "The mountains are watching" in the comments so I know you're one of the brave ones. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and remember, the hills always have eyes.